Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying your weekend. We're going to look at our PowerPoint for this weekend, which is titled The Articles of Confederation and the Federalists. So our learning target for today, I can explain why the Articles of Confederation were replaced, and I can identify the difference between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. So what we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at the first the drafting of the first document that created a national government, which was the Articles of Confederation. Then we're going to look at why the Articles were later replaced. And because of that replacement, we're going to look at a heavy conflict between two groups known as the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And so we're going to determine exactly what those groups stood for and who got what as far as the ratification of the Constitution goes. But first things first, what are the Articles of Confederation? Well, as I just said, they're the first document that makes it legitimate for us to have a federal government. Okay, so the first doc that gives the federal government power. And why that's so important is because up until this point, we've just had 13 sovereign states. And now we have really unified ourselves. And another reason why this is important is because those 13 states have finally agreed with each other. And they said, okay, we have our 13 states, and we are all in unison, which is key because that did not happen up until this point, and that is key. So what are the pros of the Articles of Confederation? Well, as we just mentioned, the fact that they were able to unify the country and allowed America to come together. That's number one. The second one was that what it did is it forced other countries to recognize the United States as a legitimate country. Okay, and why this is important is because up until this point, a lot of people just kind of recognized America as this group of, this group of people that took down the British, but they still were just this ragtag bunch. Okay, so they were finally recognized as a sovereign nation. And this was key. But, as you guys can see, there are a lot more cons than pros. The first con was that the Articles of Confederation made the federal government way too weak, because it essentially gave them no power. Some of the powers that they did not have that are absolutely crucial is that they did not have a currency. So up until this time period, each state created their own currency, and you can just imagine how much of a nightmare this would be. So just imagine whenever you travel to Canada or you travel to Mexico and you have to get new forms of money, you have to do this traveling from state to state, and that was just an absolute nightmare. And so because they had no control over the currency, they had no control over the economy. And while that doesn't seem too important, it actually is pretty crucial. Because, again, what we want to do is we want to unite as one country. And by having 13 different economies, we essentially have 13 different countries. And the last thing, and probably the biggest con, was that we were seeing rivalries develop state by state. So we had states going against each other. And this was, like I said, the biggest one. Because when we think of the United States of America, we think as one country coming together. And we did not have that with the Articles of Confederation because really we had nobody to solve any problems. And we're going to get more into this topic a little bit when we get back to class on Monday. But again, this was the most crucial one. So, why did it fail? Well, like we said, it had no power. Basically, when I think of the Articles of Confederation, I link the Articles of Confederation to a weak substitute teacher, in that they had no power whatsoever and others controlled them. So what we need to figure out is how do we get from a weak sub to a teacher in control. And the answer to this is we have to make the federal government stronger. And so what we decided to do is we decided to kind of revise the Articles of Confederation. Now the problem becomes, how do we do that? So right now we're a mess. We talked about the Enlightenment, and first what we said is a strong federal government is a bad one. Now what we come to find out is that too weak of a federal government is bad. And so our challenge now is we have to come to an agreement and meet in the middle. And this becomes very tough, and this really divides our country. And it divides our country into two groups. And these two groups are Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. Okay, so our Federalists consist of Alexander Hamilton and John Adams against Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And the debate is over the Constitution of the United States and ratifying the Constitution of the United States. And how do we do that so both parties are satisfied? Where we have a lot of state rights and a lot of individual rights, while at the same time having a strong central government as kind of a go-to figure. So, problems and responses. When we look at it, the Anti-Federalists had a lot of problems with having a strong federal government. Okay, among these problems was the idea of giving the federal government too much power. How do we respond to that? Basically, the Federalist response was pretty easy. It was, look at what's happened so far. We've had a pretty miserable time so far trying to become a country because we are not one country. We are 13 different countries. And so in order to become one sovereign nation, one strong sovereign nation, what we have to do is we have to unify. So that was just say, hey, look what's going on. We got to change it. The second thing was the idea of a king. And what I mean by king is the head of the executive branch, which, as you guys probably know, or should know, is the president. And so their response to that was a system of checks and balances, which we know so far. And checks and balances is another Enlightenment idea of having three separate branches of the government, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And by having all three of these, they will enable us to keep the, quote, king, as they refer to him as, now we know him as the president, in check. And the third problem that they had was the idea of rights. The Anti-Federalists were very scared because there was no Bill of Rights. And at first, the Federalists said that if we list what the rights are, what these explicit rights are, then that gives the federal government, that gives any government, the ability to say, well, these are the only rights that you have. But eventually, after a lot of talk, what the Federalists decided to do is they decided to compromise, and they decided to put the Bill of Rights into the Constitution, which are our first 10 amendments. Okay? So, the end result, after some meeting, the bottom line is that the Federalists pretty much get what they want. So the Federalists pretty much come out victorious. And the end result is that we now have the United States Constitution, which was ratified. Okay? So, hopefully right now, after this lesson, you guys should be able to explain why the Articles of Confederation, why they were replaced, and also you should be able to explain the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and also the end result of that debate. Okay, which of course was the Federalists coming out on top. So, if you guys are just starting your weekend, I hope you have a great one. If you are watching this at 10 or 11 o'clock at night on Sunday, I hope you had a great weekend, and I will see you in a couple hours. All right? Goodbye.